Hi, good evening. That's good. Okay, so my name is Aman Muglani, and I'm a research director with Gartner's Data Center Systems Group. As rightly mentioned by Usha, as in a part of my responsibility is to help vendors make more money out of you, and another part of my responsibility is to help you save money and decide on a strategy in terms of what is good for you, what is optimally good as from an infrastructure standpoint, what are some of the issues that you should be dealing with, so forth. I do a lot of pricing reviews. I advise CIOs in terms of their storage strategies and so on and so forth. So, talking about my responsibilities, a lot of my work is actually taking the feedback back from you guys to the vendor community in terms of pain points being faced by you, issues that are being faced by you, and actually help them design a solution that can actually help some of your requirements and some of the pain points that you're actually witnessing within your environments. I only have about 29 minutes left. Okay, so what I will do, rather, I have an enviable task of how do you talk about all things storage in less than 30 minutes. So what I will do is briefly touch upon things, not leave out anything that is too important. And of course, I'm going to be here around. So if you have any direct questions for me, we can always kind of schedule a one-on-one. So what I'm going to be talking today, okay, is something that all of you over here already know. As I almost feel bad coming up on stage and telling you, Fine, this is a problem that you're facing because this is something that you've been facing as an organization for the last, say, 2-3 years now. And that is, how do you deal with the growth of capacity within your organization? Okay, you have things like cloud computing, you have things like virtualization, you have resource constraints from a perspective of availability of manpower. Okay, so there are quite a few things that you probably need to think about. All right, how do you deal with these issues? The fact of the matter is, everything that you struggle with, the solution for that is not just infrastructure. CIOs in India, IT users in India tend to think that the solution to every problem that you face lies in buying more infrastructure. But the fact of the matter is, a successful storage plan is what you actually need to resolve a lot of the pain points that you actually face. As an organization, you need to be proactive in terms of identifying what are the issues. We need to be proactive in defining an end vision to your infrastructure. You need to work with the line of business leaders to understand where is it that the company is headed, what are the growth projections for the company, okay, what are the line of business leaders want in terms of their information requirement and their infrastructure requirement, and design a strategy around that. Infrastructure is just one part of the story. Not working. If you could just move to the next slide, please. So, if there's one thing that you actually take away from this presentation, okay, it is that your storage infrastructure over the next, say, 5 years needs to be agile, needs to be efficient, and needs to be flexible. All these three things in equal measure. You can no longer say, I'm just going to focus on one part of the story and forget about the rest. Right? As an organization, you need to be focusing on all these three aspects in equal measure. Because the point is that while one of these aspects have a direct impact on cost, the other has an impact on how quickly you're able to provision infrastructure so that business is able to quickly do things that it wants to do. The go-to-market for the business is a lot more efficient and a lot more quick. You as an organization need to move from being a hosting provider for internal users to being a service provider. A CEO comes up to you and says, fair enough, this is what I want to do. No longer can you say, listen, this will take 6 months. No longer can you say this will take 6 months, 12 months, or whatever it takes. You should be in a position to say, fair enough, this is what you have in mind, and this is what we can deliver to you in the next 2 days, or next 3 days, or maybe next week. That is the vision for infrastructure moving forward. You as an organization need to identify potential roadblocks. You need to understand what are some of the policies, procedures, and SLAs that will actually inhibit improvements in agility and efficiency. That requires a proactive approach. Okay? You need to start thinking about efficiency of technology. For example, thin provisioning, auto turing, solid state drives, scale out arrays, so on and so forth. These technologies have been around for quite some time. All right? I did a quick show of hands in the morning, all right? And a lot of the audience hadn't really deployed a lot of these technologies for whatever reason, okay? But the fact of the matter is that these technologies are mature. And if you have reservations about how to deploy these technologies or what these technologies can actually do for you, it is important that you speak to your vendor to understand the current state of these technologies, use cases for these technologies. There are enough and more white papers published that actually talk about the benefits of these technologies and how you can actually deploy them. And of course, the end result or the long-term vision would probably be to kind of move things onto the cloud. Okay? Now, had I been presenting about a year back, I would have probably said cloud is not something that you should be looking at. You know, within Gartner, I'm probably I probably had the strongest voice against cloud, so to say, within Gartner India. But the fact of the matter is that the market has evolved quite a bit in the last, say, 1 year. We actually have big name vendors, big service providers in this space. Okay, and the majority of some of the technologies, some of the offerings that are available, make it a viable option for you to consider. But then here again, it's just not about moving things onto the cloud. You of course need to have a plan behind it. You need to understand what kind of applications you want to move onto the cloud and what are some of the best use cases for cloud computing in India. So what I'm going to be talking about are three major issues. How and where will emerging technologies, virtualization, cloud computing intersect with storage? What are the best practices for improving your storage strategy? And how do you contain the growth of capacity within your organization? If we look at it from a technology and market trend perspective, a lot of users come back to me and say, server virtualization, yes, I'm on it. Okay, I have about 25% of my server infrastructure virtualized. I have 30%. A lot of organizations in India are actually on phase 2. Where you're probably thinking about virtualizing your production environments. You're moving from say 25%, 30% to 55% and 60%. That's where a lot of money is actually going to be spent moving forward. Okay? The flexibility of allowing the business to deploy infrastructure, deploy VMs as per their convenience. The fact of the matter is that there is a certain amount of storage associated with each of these VMs. They have different RPO requirements, different RTO requirements. And you will be, if you're not already, you will be dealing with a lot of complexity moving forward. You need to be investing in the right IT resources. I'll probably kind of explain that as we move along, but then investing in the right IT resources is extremely, extremely critical. Once you kind of talk about server virtualization, okay, the end result is that organizations have reported anywhere in terms of 30% to maybe even 40% increase in capacity requirements as a result of server virtualization. You talk about VDI. Organizations have reported, this is the Gartner finding in fact, that 30% of any VDI deployment is actually storage. One desktop goes down, there's only one user that is actually impacted. If a VDI environment goes down, you pick a number, right? So the fact of the matter is that as you kind of start thinking about some of these things, as you kind of go ahead and deploy some of these things, it is important that you look at it from a storage perspective as well, because you will be significantly adding a lot more complexity to the storage environment, and unless and until you plan for some of these things much in advance, you will be facing a major problem moving forward. Private cloud computing. I spoke about some moving from 30% to 60%, but the end vision for a lot of companies today is to look at private cloud computing in some way or the other. Okay? A lot of organizations in India have actually deployed private cloud computing. A lot have probably been talking about it. But the fact of the matter is that private cloud computing, again, significant amount of increase in complexity for your storage environment. Okay. There is a lot of talk about, hybrid environment. I think that's going to be a reality for all as well. Where some of your mission critical applications will continue to be in-house, okay, and some applications that you can probably kind of tolerate a certain amount of latency with will probably be pushed onto a public service provider. Okay, so that's a likely scenario moving forward. Big data, a huge discussion point, right? I personally think big data is a new marketing message that vendors will try and push down in the year 2012. Okay? But the fact of the matter is that as organizations kind of evolve and continue to build capacity, okay, big data is something that you will seriously start contemplating or thinking about in the year 2013. Okay? The notion that big data is only about scale out infrastructure is not true. The fact of the matter is that scale out infrastructure is just one side of the story. What you need to be really thinking about is the analytics piece of the entire thing. From a market perspective, we believe that big data is something that will continue to be a very niche segment of the market. All right, very large companies that actually have several petabytes of data will actually be looking at big data in a very big way. And you can actually pick a handful of customers who will actually have deployed big data by the end of 2012. But this is going to be a market reality in 2013, 14 moving forward. You need to kind of start planning for some of these things as you kind of think about your storage infrastructure. 24/7 operations. Most organizations today have about 4 copies of data. But I've spoken to organizations that actually have about 25 copies, maybe even 30 copies of the same data. Okay, so here again, a lot of capacity requirement, a lot of pressure on your storage, and you need to kind of start thinking about some of these things as you plan for your infrastructure. Excuse me. So technologies, benefit map. What you have over here are technologies that vendors have been talking about for many years now. Okay, I'd be surprised if you guys haven't heard about these technologies. So I'm not really going to get into what these technologies can do for you. Just give you some market statistics behind some of these things. Thin provisioning, for example. Sorry. Think thin provisioning, for example. If you talk about a typical DAS environment, the utilization rates are anywhere in the range of about, say, 25% to 30%. No, actually, it's actually more like 15% to 30%. To reach 30%, you need to have very sound policies, and not too many organizations are actually able to do that. In a SAN environment, unmanaged, you're talking about utilization rates of about 35% to 45%. In a thin provision environment, we're talking about utilization rates of anywhere in the range of about 65% to 75%. In a lot of environments, that basically means storage or capacity that you'll probably need for the next, say, 6 months. Organizations that have moved from thick provisioning to thin provisioning have actually managed to recapture about 35% or maybe even 40% of the capacity. And as a result, are able to use that same infrastructure for something else. You, in a way, are delaying the procurement of additional infrastructure by deploying some of these technologies. Auto-tiering. Again, excuse me, auto-tiering. There were some concerns last year about this technology not being mature. There was this perception in the market that this is a new technology and it's not completely ready for prime time usage. But the fact of the matter is that auto-tiering has been there in the market. It's proven technology. It's been tested in a number of environments in India, globally. And if you haven't deployed auto-tiering as yet, I think it's important that you speak to your vendor in terms of how you should be deploying this technology, what are some of the business benefits, and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is that, I'll probably explain tiering in great amount of details as we move along, but auto-tiering has significant cost savings. Significant savings, so to say, in terms of manageability. Your resources are available to do what they paid for. They are not there to manage data. They are there to think about innovation within the company. They are there to think about growth-driven projects. Okay, if 60% or 70% of their time is spent managing stuff, there is no time for them to probably start thinking about some of the growth-driven projects And by deploying some of these technologies, you're actually freeing up your resources to start thinking about how to kind of contribute to the growth of the company and growth-driven projects. Scale up to scale out. A lot of the infrastructure that you've been buying in the past is of a scale-up variety. The fact of the matter is that there is not too much of innovation happening in scale-up anymore. Companies today, or storage vendors, are only kind of doing incremental upgrades just to kind of feed the beast out there. Excuse me. Where the innovation seems to be happening today is scale out, right? Most companies, most storage vendors today are innovating fairly rapidly when it comes to the scale out variety of storage. That's the roadmap. A lot of the innovation, a lot of development is actually happening in scale out today. The fact of the matter is that scale up has pretty much reached the zenith in terms of the number of disk drives it can actually support. Okay? And innovation is happening in scale out. Let me give you some market statistics. 35% of all storage infrastructure sold today in India is of the scale out variety. And considering the interactions that I have with customers, the Gartner forecast also says that this market is going to be where the traction is headed in the future. We're probably looking at scale out variety, contributing to at least about 50% of storage revenues in India moving forward. So this is a market that you need to watch out for. The technology is mature. There are some proven concepts out there in the market, and vendors have actually been spending a significant amount of resources, working on this market. So you should be looking out for this. I mentioned the storage plan in the beginning of the conversation. I'll probably talk about this in some amount of detail now. As an organization, it is important that you define the end state. As an organization, you need to decide where are we today and where is it that we need to take this infrastructure moving forward. Okay? Till such time you have an end goal in mind, a lot of the investments that you probably make moving forward will not give you the kind of desired results that you probably expect. Work with the line of business leaders. Work with the CEO of the company, the top leaders of the company. Understand the strategy of the company moving forward. Okay? You as CIOs need to be contributing to the business. And unless and until you're kind of there in the planning process and are a key contributor to the business, as in your role will kind of get diminished as you move along. Work with the business to understand what is it that you need to do. Your budget constraints, competitive pressures are not going to go away. So for example, if your capacity is growing at about, there are different numbers around this, but I think the Gartner growth is more like in the range of about 85% capacity growth on a year-on-year basis. The amount of money that you're spending on maintaining your storage, maintaining the capacity growth that you're seeing, or data growth that you're seeing, okay, we believe that the Indian storage market is going to grow at about 27% in the year 2012. And the CAGR growth up until 2016 is more like about 19%. So as a result, what's going to happen is, just to kind of feed the storage growth within your environment, you probably need to start making compromises on some of the other growth-related projects. And that's not a good thing to do. So the only option for that is to come up with a storage plan, use some of these efficiency technologies, and curtail the growth of capacity within your environment. Staff resources are becoming very, very scarce in India. Most organizations today I talk to, the one big concern that actually comes up every time is, how do I retain my resources? Loyalty of IT staff is a huge problem within the Indian enterprise today. Okay, you spend resources training those staff. The loyalty is an issue that most organizations today kind of struggle with. So, so it's important that you kind of figure out a way how you're going to be dealing with these things. I don't have any advice to give you on this topic because I do IT, I don't do HR. But the fact of the matter is that you should be focusing on some of these things as you kind of think about your storage infrastructure moving forward. because you will be dealing with a lot of complexity and you need resources to be able to address the issue of complexity or deal with that complexity as you kind of move along. And IT resources is the answer for that. You will also have a situation where you will be dealing with the number of storage choices. The rapid innovation that is happening within the storage space, I think you will get to a situation where you will not know which technology to adopt. There will be so many options available in front of you that you will kind of struggle to kind of say, this is where I want to go. So the end goal for you as an organization is to move from the outer circle, or rather the available technologies, to get to the inner circle, which is basically deciding on a solution which is apt for you. Deciding on a solution basis, the roadmap that you already have in place, basis the feedback from the business in terms of where is it that the company is going, and you need to think through the various alternatives that are available and decide on a solution that is most apt for you. Of course, there are several things that you need to think about before you kind of get to the end result. Principles. You as an organization may decide to stick to a single vendor policy. Fair enough, as in I've been using a particular vendor's technology for many, many years. My resources are trained on that particular technology. I'm comfortable using this technology, so I will use this technology in the future as well. In-house versus hybrid. Okay, so before I get to that, Gartner recommends that you always have a dual vendor policy, because that's when you will be offered a competitive or competitively priced solution. In-house versus hybrid. You as an organization might say, these are certain applications that I most definitely need to keep in-house, but these are applications that I'm willing to experiment with a service provider. Okay, applications that can afford or tolerate a certain amount of latency, applications that I don't necessarily need, will probably be kind of pushed on to a service provider. Technology maturity. You might decide that you do not want to work with new companies or smaller companies. Okay, that is a wrong practice. But then, as an organization, you need to think about some of these things and have a definitive stance about how you're going to approach these things as you kind of plan for your storage infrastructure. Of course, you'll have constraints in terms of budgets, you'll have constraints in terms of schedules, data center locations, so on and so forth. Be proactive in your approach in terms of deciding where is it that you want to go. Do not let the problem get on top of you, because that will not give you the desired results. And of course, organization and operational challenges. Okay, understand where is it that you're lacking resources. Understand where is it that you're missing skill sets. Okay, and deal with the fact that organizations are not very open to the idea of change. As an organization, as an IT organization, you need to do a good job of educating the internal resources in terms of saying, hey, this is where I'm taking the organization, or this is where I'm taking the IT infrastructure. This is the impact on you, and why is it good for you? Alright, so internally, you need to be able to sell any of the growth related projects that you have in mind. Because unless and until you do that job of selling it internally, there will be severe resistance to change. Of course, the third point is, how do you contain the growth of capacity within your organization? These are some global figures, but I'll give you an India perspective. The CAGR growth for capacity from now, 2011 up until 2016, is a good 85% CAGR growth. Excuse me. The capacity growth I've already mentioned, as in 2012, the storage market will grow at about 28% in terms of value terms. And the CAGR growth up until 2016 is more like in the range of about 19%. So these are pretty heady numbers. Alright? Fact of the matter is, you need to deal with the issue of capacity growth today. And how do you do this? There are two different approaches. Number one is capacity management. Of course, there are some various approaches that you can probably take. And the second one is actually increasing the utilization rates of existing infrastructure. So on one side, you kind of stalling the process of creating more data within your organization by coming up with a set of policies that I'll probably be talking about now. And on the other side, you're talking about efficiency of existing infrastructure. You're talking about being able to use some of the existing technologies to kind of drive or curtail the growth of added infrastructure within your environment. What I have for you over here are 10 strategies that you can actually adopt to contain the growth of capacity. Information lifecycle management, data deletion, tiered storage. You know, it's a combination of technology and a combination of processes that you can actually follow to deal with the issue of capacity growth. Let me get to information lifecycle management. This was a huge topic of discussion when I just about started handling storage, which was way back in 2002, 2003. Okay, every company was talking about ILM, and it was a good term to be used in the market. All right, but the fact of the matter is that some of the available technologies today have actually helped resurface the discussion around ILM. But ILM cannot be successful unless and until you've spoken to the line of business leaders in terms of what data is important, what data can actually be deleted, what is it that you probably need from a compliance perspective, and what is it that you probably need from a perspective of information that is useful to the organization. Okay, so it is a set of technologies, set of processes that you can actually use to deal with the growth of capacity within your organization. Data deletion. Organizations that I talk to about deleting data, okay, come back to me with fairly horrific faces in terms of this is not possible, this is not practical. But the fact of the matter is that by 2015, 50% of organizations globally will actually have an active data deletion policy. 60% of your unstructured data has not been accessed in more than 3 months. As an organization, or organizations that have deployed data deletion have actually managed to save 30% of their infrastructure for use for some other applications. So it's important that you start thinking about data deletion because it is a very simple way of approaching, the issue of capacity growth within your organization. Archiving, from an Indian market perspective, I think most organizations have very mature archiving policies, so I won't get into this in great amount of detail. Application retirement. Organizations globally have reported anywhere in the range of about 35% to maybe 40% capacity savings by dealing with application retirement. There are mergers and acquisitions. There are newer applications that you can build in-house. What typically tends to happen is that organizations are a little reluctant in kind of dealing with application retirement. But the fact of the matter is that there are potential savings as you kind of think about application retirement. And it is a Gartner published note that actually says that 35% or maybe 40% savings in terms of capacity reclaimed for some of the other projects that you have in mind. Tiered storage. The difference between high performance drives and high capacity drives basically lies in IOPS. Okay, high performance drives actually give you 10 times more IOPS than high capacity drives. But that does not mean that all your data needs to be sitting on those high performance drives. The fact of the matter is that there's only 10% of your data that is actually driving 90% of the IOPS within your organization. Okay, the remaining does not need to be on these high performance drives. So a simple approach that a lot of organizations have actually used in the past was the storage administrator, who probably understood usage patterns and went back to the line of business leader and said, listen, this particular piece of information or this data has been sitting over here for many, many months now, has absolutely no business value, okay, but it's still sitting on the most expensive drives. What I'm going to do is probably push it to the lower tier of data or lower tier disk. The line of business leader says, sorry, that's not happening. This is my data and it needs to be sitting on the most expensive drives. So the way to deal with this issue is to kind of start thinking about chargeback in some way or the other. If an organization and the line of business leader is willing to kind of pay for the infrastructure that he's actually using, okay, that will lead to a lot more discipline within the organization. that will lead to things being more reasonable in terms of how IT should function within the organization. Employee data reduction. Enough and more has been spoken about it, but then organizations have reported anywhere in the range of about 40 is to 1 to maybe even 50 is to 1 kind of savings when you talk about backup data by deploying data deduplication. For primary data, as in the benchmark is more like in the range of about 5 is to 1 to maybe an 8 is to 1 kind of savings. So data deduplication is a very, very important technology for you to kind of adopt within your enterprise. Okay, and there are significant savings in terms in terms of capacity that you can probably be leveraging for some other stuff. What I will do is end with some recommendations. Incorporate efficiency technologies. They're mature. There are enough and more proof points for that. And you as an organization, if you haven't already, should be talking to your vendor in terms of how you can deploy some of these things within your enterprise. There are enough and more published resources. There are enough and more white papers that actually help you explain or understand. Think about the cloud. Okay, there are obviously cost savings associated with cloud, and the market environment is also fairly mature. So you should be thinking about the cloud in some way or the other, because that's where the vision is moving forward. And this is going to be a reality for a lot of organizations, because more and more applications, more and more users are actually thinking about the public cloud. All right, and the service provider ecosystem is also getting fairly mature from an Indian market perspective. So this is an alternative that you should most definitely be considering. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. If you do have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them offline. Thank you so much for your time.